Welcome for joining us today. This is Catholic Discovery 101, where we share the beauty of our Catholic faith with our friends and neighbors in the Pocatello-Chubbuck area. My name is Liz Johnson. I'm a parishioner with Holy Spirit Catholic Community. And today our guests are Sister Michaela Serpa from the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist and her mother Christina Serpa. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sister Michaela, let's start with you and talk about your family life first. What it was like growing up Catholic, anything you want to share about your youth.
Okay. Well, I grew up here in Pocatello, and my family was an average Catholic family. We went to Mass on Sundays. We were involved in, CCD classes, but by no means was it a huge part of the day. We prayed before meals most of the time, but not all of the time. So in that sense, I don't think it was, anything other than normal in some sense. But some of the ways that we were involved was through music or as a teenager, we had a deanery program that was very strong, and I got to interact with youth on a monthly basis at retreats. And all those things were things that allowed me to learn how to integrate my faith, which was important because here in Pocatello there aren't a lot of Catholics, and so it posed as a different challenge. But yeah.
Okay. So as a teenager, you've talked a little bit about how you stayed engaged. How about after high school, when you went off to school? Was that difficult to stay engaged in your faith?
I think that's an interesting question because it was the first time that I attended a Catholic school. So I went to a small Catholic school in Montana, Carroll College, which is in Helena, the capital. And I hadn't necessarily wanted to go to a Catholic school. I had really wanted to play softball. But when I went there, there was something in me that knew that I should be there. And so I went to this Catholic school, and it was a wonderful opportunity because the important thing is to live your faith in conjunction with the rest of your life. It shouldn't be something separate. And it's something that enriches your life. And it doesn't need to be, an overwhelming or, holy roller, I guess you could say. But it is important, an important aspect of your life, and must be integrated. So living at a Catholic school, we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of normal college things, dating and everything else. But, going to Mass, everyone went to Mass. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people went to Mass. We played music that was fun for college kids, and so it was just kind of a natural part of the college experience for me. Everyone lived on campus, so it was a lot of fun.
It's normal.
Yeah.
So Christina, how do you think parents today can keep their children engaged in the Catholic faith so they stay with us for their entire life?
As parents, we need to nurture our own relationship with the Lord openly in front of our kids and with our kids. To be a living example. Pray together when you can, and when you have difficulties, go to the Lord in prayer. Go to the Lord together in prayer. Attend the sacraments together. Encourage the kids to go with you when you're going to reconciliation, and attend Mass, on the weekends. If there's any opportunity to volunteer, to do volunteer projects, do it together, do it as a family.
Okay, all right, thanks. Sister Michaela, when did you first start thinking that you might have a religious calling?
I think I first thought about it in college, but I was ignored it and pushed it to the back. Because I was dating, I wanted to have a family, I wanted to have a big family, and naturally that's what we should want. But after I graduated college, I wasn't in a serious relationship at the time, and I recognized there was something in the back of my head that wasn't going away. Within college, I had gone to a couple of large Catholic conferences, and there I had been exposed to some different religious communities, and I think more than anything I had a curiosity about it. And there was an attraction as well. You know, there's kind of a romanticizing about religious life in some ways. When you see these young, joyful sisters, you wonder why do they feel that way? So after I graduated college, I thought, you know, I really need to ask God what He wants. And I think that's been an overarching experience of having an awareness that I need to be open to what God wants. When I decided to go to Carroll College, that was a decision that was in relation to God. And it was a gift because it wasn't something that my parents and I necessarily talked about in that way, but it was something inside of me that just always knew it. So it's nothing but a gift in that regard. But I decided at that point to begin going to daily Mass. I asked one of the sisters here, the Franciscan sister of the Eucharist here, for spiritual direction because I was certain I wasn't called to them and they could help me discern objectively. And that's a normal process when you're trying to discern or trying to grow in your faith, is to have a spiritual director. And their intention isn't to, you know, convince you one way or another, but really to support you in your prayer life and your relationship with Christ, so that you can hear the whispering of the Holy Spirit when it's time. So, and then I visited a couple of different communities, our community being one. I was going to go to one in New York and one in Connecticut, which is our community, because I was meeting with Sister Mona, who is now passed, and she said, why don't you go visit our community in Connecticut? And I thought, well, okay. So I did, and you know, both communities are amazing communities. And when I visited the community in New York, I knew immediately I wasn't called there. And when I visited our sisters in Connecticut, I thought, oh no, this is not good. I think this might be it. And I try to explain it this way because it's an attraction, it's a relationship. So if you're sitting in a room with a bunch of different guys, you might meet one and say, that one I would be friends with, and that's about it. And that one I might want to go on a date with, and that one has real potential. And it has more to do with how he looks or what qualifications he has, or it's something much deeper than that. It's a real natural attraction that kind of goes beyond that human elements. And I think that's very much what religious life is like, or what the priesthood would be like, is it comes down to an attraction of who you're being called to be in relationship with. And I'm being called to be in relationship with Christ through the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist, in their charism, their way of living it out. And you know, it's a very slow process on how you move through. So
you mentioned a spiritual advisor. Did you have more than one spiritual advisor?
I did. When I was in high school, and again, this is only a gift because I knew nothing about anything. But Father Camillus Temba was a priest here, and many of you who are from Pocatello would remember him. And I would go to him for confession. I'd call him and ask to meet with him, and I had no idea what I was doing. But really, he was, in that sense, a spiritual director, and I'm still in touch with him even to this day. So in that sense, he was my first spiritual director. But generally, you have only one. And if it's a priest, they're often also your confessor, but it doesn't have to be that way. So, and then when I came to Pocatello, I had just Sister Mona as my spiritual director.
Okay. So what was you've talked a little bit about your discernment period. Mm-hmm. How long from the time you thought that there was that little voice whispering to you till you decided, yep, this is it. This is the direction I want my life to go?
Well, I think if you go back to when I first heard the little voice, probably was early college, so then it'd be a lot longer. But by the time I was actually willing to listen, it was probably a year before I entered. I visited the sisters a few different times before I made the first step. And the first step is really, it's not even an official step in the church, but it's a transition to help you get a sense of whether or not you're called. It's called pre-postulancy. And to postulate means to ask. So it's kind of this first initial step. A lot of communities are adopting this because it allows the young woman to come and be with the community, to enter into the rhythm of prayer, the way of life, but you maintain your regular clothing. You still have your monies, your finances separate. If you have your own car, you take care of it. So it's kind of this transitionary step, which doesn't make you leave everything behind, but you start to enter into the relationship. And I would liken it to going on a few dates. I think there's a real parallel of the formation process and the dating marriage process. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about the formation process. You start out with temporary vows, is that right?
No, there's actually several years of steps before that.
Before that?
So
okay.
Pre-postulancy is 1 year, give or take, and generally you go to Meriden where Mother House is for that first pre-postulancy. And then after that year, if you really feel you're called to continue the relationship, to deepen it, then you become a postulant. And as a postulant, that's the first official step. So you wear what's called a modified habit. So it would, on the top, look a lot like what I'm wearing now, but it would be shorter than what I'm wearing, and you wouldn't have the belt or the cross. You would have a medal. And at that point, you would dispossess a lot of your things. So obviously you dispossess your clothes. You would dispossess, you know, if you have an iPad or something, you know, you would dispossess that. It doesn't mean you would never use it ever again, but you would enter into living some of the poverty, some of those things, even though you haven't taken vows. So that's 1 year.
Okay.
At that point, it's a real year of discernment for the novitiate. And the novitiate, you're a novice, which means new. And as a novice, you're a novice for 2 years. The first year for us is the canonical year, which is a lot of language, but canonical refers to canon law, and which means every community has a canon law, canonical novitiate. And in that year, you're enclosed in the community. So if you have a professional work of some kind, you would take a year off from that work. And it would really be a time to intensify your experience of living the religious life, living within the community and the charism, and you're enclosed, so you don't go out, you don't go visit your family, you don't, but you don't feel trapped. It's really a beautiful kind of enwombing time.
Okay.
And it's a very important time because the 2 years being a novice is preparation for vows. So it's really a discernment, am I called to make vows? And these are all preparatory steps, and very, I would say the novitiate is very likened to dating, you know, very serious dating. So once you make vows, you make 3 vows. Chastity, poverty, and obedience.
And those are the perpetual vows?
No, those are first vows.
Okay.
So you make the vows for 3 years. And then at the end of those 3 years, you continue to discern, am I called to renew my vows? I just renewed my vows, so that's where I'm at. So I renewed my vows for 3 years. At the end of that 3 years, if I feel called, again, still a discernment process this whole time, then I would make final vows or perpetual vows, which is a big celebration like a wedding. We have invitations and flowers and all sorts of priests and bishops, and it's a very, you know, big celebration.
So are you still a novitiate then?
No, I have temporary vows.
You have temporary vows. So how many years does this process take?
It takes 10 years.
Wow, before you take
final vows.
Before final vows.
So imagine if you dated and were engaged for 10 years before you married. You better be sure by that time.
Maybe more people need to do that.
Well, you know, and our life has an intensity to it, so it's very important because there are a lot of things that you give up and a lot of things you gain. And it's a particular calling. So the intensity of it is important because we're being formed as a person, as an individual, but we're also being formed in our relationship with Christ, who becomes our spouse. And that happens in a very different way. So it's important that we have that time for all of that growth.
Somewhere in the process, you took a new name. Why? Explain that.
Sure, sure. When we become a novice, we take a new name. And different communities do it in different ways. So some communities, you don't take a new name. Our community does. Some communities, you choose it all yourself. The way our community does it is we can submit 3 names, let's say, to our Mother General. And the name she chooses for us might be the name we gave her, and it might be a name that we didn't give her. But ultimately, she's discerning, you know, what is the name that God is calling you? Because that's the name that you're given. And the tradition of changing names really stems back to the Old Testament, where Abram becomes Abraham, Sarai becomes Sarah. And this is really something to mark you as being changed, as being marked by God, a transition in your growth, in your step. And you know, even the Holy Father changes his name to Pope Francis. So this is a long-standing tradition within the church, and even Jesus gives Peter a new name. So that's something that has always been in religious communities, and different communities live it out in different ways. But that's how ours does it. And I was given, I didn't submit any names. I said, I've been praying about it, and I've not gotten any names come to me. I guess I'm not a very good prayerful person yet. So I said, whatever you give me. And so our Mother General gave me Sister Michaela after St. Michael the Archangel, and expressed that an innate gift of mine is a very protective nature, and so that I can live into to that gift that I have.
Good. So Christina, what's it like having a child with a religious calling?
It's a learning experience for us. We were not, of all the questions you've asked, everything about formation, we were not aware of any of that. So it's been a learning experience for us. And as she's moving through this process, we're gaining another family.
Okay.
Because the sisters of the community are, well, she expressed it, she said it's like having in-laws. So we are forming relationship with our new in-laws through Sister Michaela.
So it's not too different from having a child who chooses married life.
When a child chooses religious life or a child chooses married life, they're moving into a new relationship. They're leaving the nest and they're moving into a new relationship. And it's up to us whether we want to embrace that relationship and support it or distance ourselves and feel like we've lost a child. And we haven't lost a child. In marriage or in religious life, we gained new family.
Okay, good. So, Sister Michaela, give us a little bit of background information on the Franciscan Sisters of the Universe. How were they founded?
Okay. The Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist were founded 40 years ago. It's our 40th anniversary. And it was around the time of the Second Vatican Council. We came from a much larger community from the Midwest, the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. And this time, if you speak with anyone who lived then, said it was kind of a tumultuous time. There were a lot of religious leaving, a lot of priests leaving, a lot of changes in society as well. And so to try and make it short, our community was founded on 10 principles, and some of those are very basic principles of religious life, which include living in community, praying together, wearing the habit, making the vows, and how we live those out. And at that time, the community that we came from was so large, they had provinces. And they were all over the country. So they proposed these 10 terms to their then Mother General, asking that they could become kind of an experiment. And if it worked really well, then the whole community could adopt this. There was never a desire to leave that community. In fact, when it did happen, it was very painful. So as time went on, they did live these 10 principles, and much of the rest of the community moved in a different direction. So the we became a separate province, but not separate from the community, but they named us a province. So at that time, when the distance grew so far, we went to Rome to say, what should we do? Both our representatives from the FSPA as well as the sisters from our province. And Rome said, this is how different religious communities have come about all through time, with different gifts and different, a different flower of the bouquet of the church, and said, I think it's time that you separate as a distinct community. And that's when we were given the name Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist, which was very important to us that we had a Eucharistic centering, because we came from Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. And even to this day, there's still perpetual adoration. So the Eucharist has been such a central part of our spirituality. So at that point, we moved to Connecticut, and it was out of a relationship with a pretty well-known Benedictine abbey there. And so we were formed 40 years ago. Our two foundresses are still living, and our main foundress is 93 and still works part-time at our home care, and she meets with us in formation regularly. So it's a real gift that they're here, that they're instilling in us what are those founding principles, how do we live out our spirituality and really maintain the joy that is called forth in our Franciscan spirituality.
So who's in charge?
So there is a real clear hierarchy, which is very important to living our life. There's almost 90 sisters in our community, so if you don't have an authority structure, it doesn't work well. The other thing is the authority structure is necessary for us to live our vow of obedience, because if there's no one in authority, who are you obedient to? So we have a Mother General. Her name is Sister Sean Vergowan, or Mother Sean Vergowan. And there's a Vicar General, Mother Miriam. And then there's a council that she has. And the council is comprised of sisters from various different locations in the U.S. as well as in Assisi. We have one sister that comes from Assisi in Italy. And they make a lot of the decisions for the community on where we'll be and what we'll do, but always in consultation with the whole community. So
you've talked a little bit about the Mother House. What's that like? I think a lot of people have an image of a stark building, and that's not it, is it?
No. So because of the way we were founded, we actually lived in several different homes until we really got our foundation. So the home I live in was built in 1929, and it's a fairly large home, and we have a lot of land with animals and gardens. We have goats and sheep, which are my favorite to work with, but we have chickens and cats, and we've had rabbits, which will probably start up again. And we also have 2 sets of land. So the other set of land has our very large counseling center. And we do marriage and family counseling, we do individual, and we have about 100 clients a day we see there. We also have a home health care where we go into people's homes to care for their needs, as well as a home hospice. So people who would like to die at home, we have a service available for that. So those are our really main apostolates there. But I live with 13 sisters, and we have 15 sisters for dinner every night, and sometimes more. There's about 35 altogether in our Mother House in Connecticut.
Okay. Can anybody visit?
For the most part, yeah. I've had a lot of people come and visit, my family. We have a lot of people come to the land, especially on Saturdays when we're working outside. One sister works at a public high school, so her students will come work with us. Okay. And oftentimes people are referred to us who maybe are in a in-between spot in their life. They're not quite sure what they should do. And so we have what's called the LAND program, a volunteer program where they live with us for free. They eat with us, they go to Mass with us and pray with us. And in exchange, they work on the land. If they need counseling, we'll provide that for them. But it's really just a time for them to be and to experience the land and allow that to transform them and prepare them for wherever God's leading them to go, to college or what have you.
Okay, so with your group, with the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist, your profession is as a pharmacist.
That's right.
How does that work with your religious life? I think a lot of people are under the impression that if you go into religious life, that's where all your focus is. But you have a very demanding profession. How does that work?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's a real stretch to make it work. Our community has the gift that the sisters have a lot of different works, a lot of different places they work. Some are lawyers, some are teachers, some are internet design, web designers, some work in the Vatican Library, some teach at colleges or seminaries throughout the country. And we actually have one other sister who's older who was a pharmacist as well. So it's much like family life. If your profession is ever getting in the way of your relationship with your family or your ability to be integrated into your family, then you would not do that. And so as long as I can be held by the community, continue to live my religious life, live my vows with the intensity and maintain the relationship, then I can go and do my work as a pharmacist. And my work as a pharmacist is really an extension of the mission of the community. So I'm sent out as a pharmacist to work, and it's very much a mission of presence. So, and I'm always challenged actually to think of the principles within pharmacy and how does that integrate into my religious life? How does that make me think about what I do as a sister or how I interact with people? And what are the analogies I can draw from my professional life into my relationships and my religious life?
But you took a vow of poverty.
Yes.
How does that work?
With having a paycheck? My paycheck goes to the community. And so all of our monies go together. I don't see my paycheck at all. And then my needs are cared for, as well as the needs of the other sisters. Some sisters maybe can't work because they're from another country and they don't have their green card, or they're in the midst of school and trying to pay tuition. So all of our monies come together and then care for the needs of the community. It might be that we need to put a new fence up for the goats or something. So, but that's my vow of poverty, is that I live within what I need, and when I express what I need, then I'm given that. But we live simply, but we have fun too.
I must say, having known you since before you started your discernment period, I don't think I've ever seen you happier. And we are truly blessed to have you as a part of our community.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you so much for taking your time to be here. This is Sister Michaela's only visit home for the year, and she took her time to come and spend this with us, so I am especially appreciative. Our time is at an end. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you will continue to join us in the future. We air on Sundays at 6 p.m. and Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. On behalf of Father John Wooster, thank you, and I humbly ask God to bless each and every one of us. Thank you.